Welcome to Frame of Reference, informed, intelligent conversations about the issues and challenges facing everyone in today's world. In-depth interviews to help you expand and inform your frame of reference. Now here's your host, Raul Labreche.
Welcome, folks, to another edition of Frame of Reference, Profiles in Leadership. Last week, I began a conversation with someone that I began a conversation with back in May, I believe, of this year. He was in Dubai at that point. Now he's in Singapore. And we were just talking while we were off the air, off recording, that he's now heading from here to Beijing. And then
That's right.
To, what was the next place after?
To Africa.
To Africa.
Tanzania.
Okay.
Yeah.
Which is, there's some really interesting things going on in Africa as well. But he is the author of a book called The Great Transition, a Personalization of Finances Here, and is in the midst of writing a second book called The Winning Civilization. And Emmanuel, thank you again for being my guest and being so gracious with your time. For someone that is only going to be home for 5 days, I hope that your family is forgiving me for taking up any of that time right now. So we started talking and got into. I'm just always amazed at the twists and turns and additional topics that come up through our discussions. But one that we've kind of talked around and is of concern to me, I guess, in terms of this transition that we're making from, centralized banks to individualized, personalized banking or transactions, is the process of displacing those banks and or power brokers, the middle people, if you will, that currently profit, substantially from being in that position, from being the ones that provide a resource, an ability to be a part of a collective where their money, their assets is held. And even though that process is obviously broken. I mean, we had talked about Silicon Valley Bank, and part of the problem with Silicon Valley Bank was the people making the decisions of what to do with those assets took far greater risks than, in retrospect, were they should have made. But their motives were the same motives that have been motivating people in that industry forever, and that was greed. Their desire to amass more wealth through their ability, their astuteness, their acumen in the world of finance, and taking a risk on things that, had they had any vision of what that would mean down the road, they would have maybe hedged a bit more than they did. So how do we break that when it has so much amassed power at this point? And will they let us break it?
So one of the themes that I wrap my mind around in the book, or the personalization of finances here, is the end of intermediation. That technically, you and I transacting with each other do not need an intermediary. We do not need a bank for payments, for transfer of assets, for borrowing from each other. And the technologies for all this exist today. It's not like we're talking about something that we wish exists in the future. Peer-to-peer platforms, for example. And in the first 15 years of the end of intermediation didn't end. It had its life extended somewhat. And that's a lot to do with regulation, which insists that we need to use the licensed intermediators instead of going off and building our own little ecosystems. And the second reason they've existed is that the new players that promise decentralization, or they call them in finance DeFi, decentralized finance, were not as decentralized as they claim to be, which is if you are dealing with Ethereum as a cryptocurrency, you are actually dealing with the Ethereum Foundation that holds the whole relationships together, or Binance, that you're actually dealing with Binance, the corporation. So the role of the platforms continue to to function. Then the question is, how is it that we are now in decentralized finance and we still need an intermediator to either provide liquidity or validity of the transactions? And the interesting thing is that some of the regulatory actions in the US, like the SEC trying to call cryptocurrencies a security and to take the exchanges to task, had the cathartic effect of purifying them and taking them back to the road of decentralization. So the decentralization of finance, the deconstruction of the intermediary function is a work in progress, and it's taking a long time building because it's being distracted by certain human activities such as regulation, as well as by the nature of society itself to aggregate information around certain players because they provide us the safety, the security, and they validate the parties with each other. Now, what's interesting about the power of the ability to process information that ChatGPT or generative pre-trained transformers are creating for us, and large language models and neural networks, is that it's increasing the power of the ability to process information. And when you add power to the ability to process information, there is new meaning that is being created in the transactions. So if you take a peer-to-peer platform, for example, in the US, you have SoFi and Prosper. These were the first versions of the peer-to-peer platforms that, guess what? After 10 years of being a disruptor in finance, they all just threw in the towels and they said, you know what, we're going to apply for a bank license. And almost all the peer-to-peer players ended up, applying for bank licenses. And then you scratch your head and say, so what happened to the peer-to-peer model? And what went wrong? And where is it going now? So with new processing technology, the future of peer-to-peer platforms is not the product that sits on the platform. So the thing about Prosper and SoFi and all the other peer-to-peer platforms was that in the original iteration, while they said that you now don't need a bank, we can bring a lender and a borrower of money for a mortgage to make a transaction, they still call the product a mortgage. In other words, it had all the characteristics of the original mortgage that the banks were selling. And they couldn't imagine it as anything other than a mortgage. So when somebody wants to buy a property, he goes out there, he puts a lien on the property, and then he gets the title deed to that. That's a mortgage. Now, when you put a lot more information or processing capabilities on the information, the product changes from traditional banking products like a mortgage into something totally different that can be constructed between the parties interacting with each other. So what I say is that the conversation is the product. Okay, so when you think about the future of finance, the future of intermediation, it's now time to start thinking that what the best thing that any platform can do is to bring as many users as possible and make them talk with each other. And the more they talk with each other, the more the learning platforms will be able to generate meaning from which they will create products that don't exist today. Okay, so what I tell bankers is that when the product doesn't change, nothing changes. So if all the technology that you're putting into digitization is designed to sell the same products that you've been selling in the analog world, it means that despite all the technology, nothing changed. So when we look at what happened to Silicon Valley Bank, They thought that what they had on their books was a deposit account, the liabilities business. What they didn't realize is that once you digitize the deposit business, it starts to take on new characteristics that requires you to define it something other than deposits. So in the old days, deposit means you give the best possible interest rates to your customers. They leave their money with you, and then you lend it to other people. When money is digital, the interest rates that you give are not interesting enough for people to want to leave the money with you at all. The only reason they leave the money with you is not to generate wealth, but as a platform for utility. In other words, that when people are able to use the money that they leave with you as a deposit for their digital transactions, for their payments, and so on, the aggregate of that is what you call deposits. And when you digitize it, that deposit is turbocharged. It's dangerous. It can evaporate on you. And you need to figure out where it's taking you. So that is why today there is a large and growing digital wallet industry that has everything from traditional bank deposits to cryptocurrencies on the other extreme. And all of these have a similar function in there, which is the utilization of deposits for digital transactions. And the value of the player is no longer based on how much interest you give. In fact, banks really don't give any meaningful interest anymore. It's not possible to become rich on the back of a bank deposit today, right? So, and the rules of the game have shifted. And the banking industry hasn't figured it out yet. They're still looking for excuses why Silicon Valley Bank failed on the balance sheet, which is a valid reason and an important reason, but they're not paying attention to the transition that their industry is making. That one day all the same elements on their balance sheet will have a different function than they used to have in the analog days. So the long way to answer your question is as to whether how intermediation will evolve is that it is evolving, and it's looking for new forms and new purposes, and we will know that it's made the transition when the products start looking differently. And that we're coming to that very, very shortly.
So mortgages won't be mortgages anymore. There'll be something else completely different that assigns a value, perhaps even on different characteristics than what we...
Yeah, we talked about it last week, which is, imagine what a mortgage would look like if a young kid, a Gen Z or a Gen A, Alpha Gen, is able to complete a mortgage in three, push of a button on the phone,
right.
And what used to take 3 months to get validated, what took 3 months to get validated. Sorry, did you lose me there?
No, you just paused for a moment and now you're back. You're fluent again.
And what cost 3 months to be completed on a mortgage transaction, whether it's, the need to look for caveats and liens on a property and so on before the lawyers release it for transmission. And once all of that information is digital and a kid is able to complete a mortgage transaction in a second, what do you think mortgages will look like then? Mm-hmm. It'll be a plaything. It won't be something in which you are going to build wealth on. You might flip mortgages 3 times a day. It's highly liquid, and the information on the mortgage is out there for everybody to see. So we are coming to that world where the products that we become accustomed to are going to start looking very, very different.
So won't there, even in that sort of interaction, still be a need for... I'm trying to think about how this works, because if I'm the mortgagee, I can sell mortgages and I can, as you said, push them with almost instant kind of transaction. But I'm still, as the person that has to pay that mortgage, who do I pay it to if the owner that was the owner this morning is now something else? Won't there be a need for some sort of centralized hub, if you will, in which that hub may just have different spokes depending on the time of the day and the person that's decided that they want that particular mortgage for that particular residence or building or whatever. Won't that function or won't there still be a need for that kind of intermediary? Because I have to certainly pay for that asset.
Yeah, that side of the balance sheet also changes, because you would not be taking a mortgage for 30 years of your life. You would your source of funding will not be just one source, because you have access to so much information that you can break down your mortgage into various types of lending or borrowing. Part of it can be a long-term loan, part of it can be a short-term lease, another part of it can be turned into a timeshare. There are lots of things that you can do on the other side, the liability side of the balance sheet, to be able to fund the mortgage. And then your purpose of having the mortgage comes into play, which is your purpose to save up for a 30-year asset, or is your purpose to flip your asset in the next 30 days? So both sides of the balance sheet starts to change. And it's us that the older generation that is not able to imagine this. It is the generation that is being born today that are native to digital assets and native to a whole amount of information being thrown at them, which to us, when we look at the TikTok account, we say it's so distracting. It's so much information being aggregated into 1 minute, and when you think of that amount of information being aggregated on a mortgage portfolio, it starts to look different, and the purposes for which people transact, starts to be liberated in that they will be able to use it for whatever purpose they want. And at the end of the day, what a Gen Z or a Gen A considers to be an asset of value is going to be very different. It's already very different. In fact, this is the other thing that we talked about, I think, which is you are an influencer, and an influencer has a value to it. What is an influencer? It didn't have a value before that. And it's got a serious value. It's an economic value that can pay your bills for a long time. It's a career now, and therefore, your lifestyle and what you consider to be valuable changes. A lot of it has to do with the symmetry of information, which is the information that you have, I have, and that we're both. We both become richer because we both have the same information, and when we make that information available to everybody else, that's when that information becomes more valuable. So your question as to how will the intermediation business disintegrate? It's when you start throwing more information into it. In fact, I do say this in my book, by the way, that Adam Smith said that the most productive form of business or operations is the small business. It's not the large corporation. And the reason is the small businesses keep their costs to themselves. They have control over the inventory and so on. But what happened was it was the large businesses that aggregated the information and aggregated the profit of any enterprise. And then about 300 years later, in the 1970s, there was another, and I say this in my book, Ronald Coase, the Chicago economist, who said, why is it that the small business didn't thrive? It was, and why do we now exist in the world of big businesses? And the reason was that in Adam Smith's time, right up to the 1970s and even up to today, there's a dissymmetry of information, that the small business doesn't have access to information such as the cost of labor, the cost of raw material, and so he's always dependent on somebody else, whereas the large businesses aggregate all of these values and therefore have a bargaining power that a small business doesn't have. So we are going back to the ability to liberate the value in the individual to have the same power as the large industry. And that's what information is doing to society, to finance, the whole intermediation game.
It's doing that to education as well, that, teachers used to be able to stand up and just espouse facts that now can be fact checked all over the place. Where I come back to with so much of that, though, is, and we talked about that a bit in the first episode, is the value of lying, becomes decreased because it interferes with the accuracy and the importance of information. Because it devalues the information. But what it has done is it's also produced an incentivization for narcissism. So my question is then how, and I think you've alluded to it, that the systems don't exist yet and are perhaps, becoming rapidly, if not, at light year speed, more important, are to determine the code of conduct or the rule set that will be utilized by people participating in this new economy. Because without some sort of framework that says this is okay, this is not, if you do this, you're penalized. If you do this, you'll be rewarded. Just human nature seems to require that sort of framework in order to coexist. I come back to Star Trek again, the world in which there is, incentivization for being a positive contributor to a society versus there is no crime anymore in that world. There is no conflict because the profitability of it long ago faded when everyone had their essential needs met and there was no need to, do anything other than increase the value of yourself through learning and skill sets and, things that you found interesting, which is interesting, kind of a form of Marxism. And every time you bring up Marxism, it becomes, oh, you're a communist. And, I always think, well, have you ever read anything? So, how do we get to that place, and who determines what that rule book is, what it contains and what it does not?
Raul, during the early days of the platform economy, and that's the last 20 years, America was the firstborn child of the platform economy, and all these evils, the issues that we saw in the U.S. In the last 20 years, the polarization of ideas in society, the silos that were formed, and the accentuation of biases, all of that is the result of the platform economy. It creates echo chambers that accentuates biases like you wouldn't believe. Mm-hmm. And we saw that all played out in the economy or the politics of the U.S. And the U.S. was using a structure in politics that was created in the 1700s, to deal with problems that were arising in the 2020s. In some of the other countries had sort of modified their structures to contain, to absorb the issues that were being created. And one of the issues is this, that minority communities that were considered economically insignificant and intellectually too small scale to be of influence on the national stage, all of them got accentuated. So all of them were being heard and were becoming players on the national platform. And the political system chose only either this or that. It reduced all of them into the lowest common denominator, and so you get ridiculous outcomes, which is it's the person or the leader who is the lowest common denominator who actually gets the national stage. Whereas in Europe, for example, there's all this proportional representation and alliances and so on help to absorb all of these different interest groups that get a platform in a platform economy. So America didn't deal with it well, but that's only because it took the brunt of the platform economy in its face. It was the cold face of the platform economy. A lot of the other countries in the world could pick and choose what they liked about the platform economy, and they could even shut down aspects of it. So you have, countries like China, which can have entirely shut down parts of the ill effects of the platform economy that they didn't want to influence them, and they look a lot more organized as a result. Okay, that doesn't mean that that they found the answer. It's just that they bought a little bit more time for themselves. Now we're entering another phase where with even more information that's processed, real time, and it's now not even platform anymore. Each of us is a platform. I can create a community around myself. You can, whether it's on crypto or on blockchain, the empowerment of the individual. And then you get a whole new set of factors that we now need to digest and then see how it's going to be playing out. And the most important indicator or symptom of the empowerment of the information age, as we talked about, was deception. In fact, the interesting thing is this, that someone said this, that the crime in the market space was theft. The crime in the network phase is deception, and in the network phase, you and I can decide to be different things to different people. In the digital phase, we can decide to transact differently. In the market space, you are you, and you'll always be you, and I'll be me, and I'll always be me. And so, the early days of the platform age was in the market space, where platforms were used to transact. You got the Amazons, where there's a buyer and a seller, transacting with each other. And it was very important that there was only one you and there's only one me. But in the network phase, with avatars and with multiple identities, you could be different things to different people, and it's an important part of your self, worth, which is that you have multiple identities in the network, in the network universe, and that gives you incredible amount of power to interact and to create communities, different communities that are relevant to you. Now, how will all of these different communities come together to make a consensus, to agree on something? Those rules are not written yet. In fact, the problems that will create those rules haven't happened yet. And once they start happening, America once again will be on the cold face of the next, iteration of the information age. In some ways, I'm grateful that it's the U.S. because it's decided for itself that it will not hold back on information. It will not, censor information. It will not curate information, that all players have equal access to it. But the U.S. will pay a huge price for that set of values, helping them navigate, helping the U.S. to navigate, its way through. Nobody has the answer, it is. Any society that wants to embrace artificial intelligence and the network economy fully will have to pay a price. So we haven't got there yet, but the early days is not very. It's not very promising because there are no structures yet put in place to curate the process.
Right. We so desperately need those structures in order to constructively build a future which will be, frankly, worth living in. it strikes me that it is, it's part of what people have talked about AI being so dangerous, is that we don't yet, it's all happening so quickly that we don't really understand the implications, all the implications that technology and that moment of reasoning that, computers are going to develop, that, will their morality, will their code of ethics be one that, if we assume that it's the same as ours, then there could be very positive benefits. If we assume that they will, look at our code of ethics and morality as being preposterous because no one follows it, or at least not everyone follows it, then, will we become like, an anthill that's in the way of a superhighway? They were interesting a little bit, but they're so passé now. We've moved on. So. I don't know. I strive. I wish that there could be some set of mutually agreed upon. And I think, to some extent, the 10 Commandments were that for a while. I forget there's a law or a series of laws within the Mesopotamian culture that were, Hammurabi, is it? Or
Hammurabi, yeah.
Hammurabi, and those were an attempt by larger groups of people to come up with behaviors and, ways of conducting oneself that were, Yeah, and they are restrictive of our freedoms, which, America, you can't restrict my freedoms. But they also make it possible for us to coexist in the same places without the kind of, as you've said, we're taking it in the face right now in America because we've allowed opinions and, influence, because there are people with opinions that have very great influence, but they're based on lies. The influence that they're utilizing is based on a set of biases that appeal to one group of people and are absolutely detestable to another group of people. So we get into the whole argument of, well, what's truth? Your truth may not be my truth. That we're in such a precarious place right now, not only in the U.S., but I think across the world, as to how do we discern what's real?
The problem with rules is like this, and this is the example that I use. If you took a photograph of New York City, a street in New York City in 1901, you'll see lots of horse-drawn carriages on the streets, on Broadway, on any of the streets, on Fifth Avenue. And then the photographs of those streets, you just need to Google them, it's there. And then and there would be the one motor vehicle that Henry Ford had released. Okay. And guess what? In 1901 or 1902, all the rules were stacked against the motor vehicle, not the horse carriages, right? And the reason is the motor carriage was heavy, it was noisy, it damaged the roads, it frightened the horses, and it was uncomfortable, and it was not a gentlemanly thing to be using. It's a novelty. And then you take a photograph which is 1910, okay, just 10 years later, and you'll see the streets are full with motor vehicles and very few horse-drawn carriages. And today, of course, in New York, you would find the horse-drawn carriage, just one, plying the tourist route, and then everything else is, vehicles. So what happens is that as the vehicles became quieter, lighter, didn't damage the roads, more comfortable, much faster, all the rules that were stacked up against the motor vehicle started to just fall apart. There was no reason to apply them anymore. They weren't frightening the horses. There were not many horses anyway, and they were cheaper to buy than to have a horse-drawn carriage. And the rules just peeled away.
Well, and the rules became a whole different set of rules, right? We over time have developed. You have to have turning indicators, and you have to have speed limits, and you have to have seat belts, and you have to have crash bags, and all of the things that we've demanded as consumers are built around that new set of things. And now we have, automated cars, self-driving cars that we have to develop a whole new set of rules for those now, right? The thing does seem to determine the set of rules that apply. And so here we have a whole new environment, a whole new construct of personalization of banking. So there, as personal as it needs to be and as individualized as it needs to be, it also needs to be, ruled by, to some extent, by a set of commonly agreed upon principles. You don't cheat people out of things. You don't treat people like, they're idiots. You don't behave in such a narcissistic way that, you're only building your own wealth at the expense of other people's livelihoods. Greed and fear.
Raul, I'm a big believer in society's ability to respond. I'm a big salsa dancing fan. Okay, I spent 10 years learning this damn thing. I was 2 left feet. I couldn't dance, and then I went for class. And after 1 year of learning, I had no guts to dance on the ground on the dance floor. And then over time, my sense of confidence built. And something that I learned about dancing which is magical, is that if I went to New York today, and my dancing lessons were a lot in Singapore and Beijing, and then if I went to New York today, a cross-body lead in New York is exactly the same as the cross-body lead in Singapore. A cross-body lead in Colombia, which is where salsa, the two-step, one of the forms of salsa was originated. Cross-body lead is the same, and then chufla is the same anywhere in the world, in Berlin and in Argentina. Then you ask, who put these rules together? There is no global council of salsa dance steps instructors. There is no governing body at all.
The Salsa Federation.
On one and on two, and then on top of it, is able to absorb variations and evolve into new forms of dancing like kizomba and zouk. It's not just static; it just keeps moving. And as it evolves, everyone around the world understands the rules as they evolve. And then I look around me and I can't find the guy who put it together. And that's because in that universe, rules are created and commonly understood. So what I've seen in the dancing scene gives me faith that human society is able to organize. And in some ways, it's governments that get into the way and distort that organization capability. That human society does have that tendency towards forming normality in their interactions with each other. Courtesies are the same anywhere in the world. You don't have to teach it. People understand that, when you stand up for a lady, you're being kind, or you open the door for somebody. It's just taught. So we need to lean a little bit on the human capacity for organization and not think that everything is created by state. And in many instances, state is the problem. Because it's self-serving and it's got agendas which are not commensurate with what everybody else wants to achieve. So I think that in finance, I see this a lot, that a lot of the so-called innovators and the disruptors in finance have finally came down to say that, we need to be regulated in order to give us the certainty and the trust. But that's only going so far, because there's a world beyond regulation. There's a world beyond the need for a third party to regulate you. That you are able to be self-regulating, as it were, but not in the way that self-regulation is usually referred to, which is usually an interest group that is, again, organized as a formal structure to regulate. That communities have a way of finding the common ground. We need to have a little bit of faith on that to know that we need to lean on that, because coming from Singapore, where when people here want to think about entrepreneurship, their first response is the government must encourage entrepreneurship. And that's exactly what entrepreneurship is not. So the idea that something has to be formally regulated to give it shape is something that we we shouldn't get too comfortable with that. It's the easy answer out.
You make me think as you're talking, and I this is one of the primary rules of interviewing that I shouldn't be breaking, but it strikes me that the regulator will come from the arts. It strikes me that when I think of things like a Taylor Swift concert, going for, I forget what, they're selling the seats now behind the stage for some astronomical amount of money, like hundreds and hundreds of dollars, because people just want to be a part of that. Because Taylor Swift is a very talented artist, because Taylor Swift's songs speak to a wide variety of people, because her artistry inspires people. Just like art, art has become one of the great, methods of raising wealth now, because people have found a way to contribute to parts of various pieces of art. And as art increases in value, their investment increases in value. But then I think of theater, which is where my training is. And theater's great skill since the Greeks, and who knows before that just isn't recorded. One of its great abilities is to not only tell the stories of humankind that are important to the groups. So whether it was telling the tale of the great buffalo hunt that you just returned from, and the people that were able to really illustrate how big the buffalo was and how the buffalo came charging at us and we flew. Those were the people that were, I love it when he comes back and tells those stories. So not only the story aspect and the communication of history, but the other thing that theater does, I think, better than anything else, any other art form, is that it represents the realities of human beings in ways that are universally translated. I don't have to necessarily, understand the language, although it helps to understand the themes of the play. And they have not changed in thousands of years. The themes are still the same. And what they do is, by exposing the theme, we aspire to something greater. We see the consequences of that behavior, and we see the reality of, if only they had, things would have turned out differently. And a comedy has one way of establishing that. A drama has another way of establishing that. But it strikes me that maybe there's a key there, that if we can find a way to utilize the power of the arts, that we will, by virtue of the organics of the situation, we will figure out a way communally to dance a salsa that is both unique but is understood by a great variety of anybody who's ever danced to salsa will go, I really like that way, or I really like that way. That's a neat addition to it.
And just let me add to what you just said, right? Like, you take Taylor Swift, and you see how the journey that Taylor Swift had to go through to get to where she is now, which is by the way, I was in Warsaw, and Beyonce was playing. was performing just 2 nights. Okay, and I couldn't leave the city for 4 days, and I got kicked out of my hotel room. Okay, I mean, that's the mesmerizing effect that these artists have in entire cities now. Entire economies are being created around entertainers. And just think about the journey that they went through, because in the old days of the long playing record, the skill was about selling a record, an LP, for $35. Mm-hmm. Then you went into digital forms and so on, and it destroyed the price of a song. And today you can buy a song for less than $1 or a few cents on your iPad or your iPhone, right? And yet look at how wealthy it's made. And how powerful of an influence it's made of these artists, So that's the other side of the story. And what's made them powerful is the network effect, the influence that they have, not just on individual listeners, but entire communities of listeners generating value on top of each other, right. And then wanting to be at the concert all at the same time. Yeah. So that's the journey that the platform economy has taken artists and has created a new powerful force in the universe that didn't exist before. In fact, while it was getting here, it looked like the value of artists was going to be destroyed because songs were being sold for a song, or for very little value, and yet it was the network effect that gave them the power that they have today.
Right.
And they make their money not from that individual songs that they sell, but from their branding, their marketing, their influence on society. That's a very, very powerful illustration of the ability to disintermediate and disintegrate the existing form and take it to a new realm that we don't even realize what it's going to look like in the future.
Right.
So artificial intelligence, the personalization of platforms and personalization of finance, and then the personalization of platforms, they look like destructive forces, but they're creating new forces that's going to hold us together that we're not aware of right now. That even as we become empowered individually, it might have a positive effect on how society holds together. Except that I can already see that to exist in that society, the average knowledge or the knowledge of an average person has to be much, much higher than it is today. You can't enter the network economy with a lower knowledge base, which means that people in faraway countries or in underdeveloped countries are going to have the same amount of knowledge as people in highly developed countries. And imagine what's that going to do to them and their influence on the whole ecosystem of global trade, global relationships. So we are looking at both positive and negative effects. The lessons to be learned from the first iteration of platform economy shows that the power of people like Taylor Swift and Beyonce, and it's going to create new icons of reference that entire communities are going to hold on to. So to be an icon of reference in the network world is a very, very powerful role to play indeed. Much more powerful than governments.
I would hope that those influencers would be people of good character. That's my hope. Honestly, is that we can develop a set of mores that will incentivize not only appearing to be a good person, but being a good person. That people will become more valuable by virtue of the good that they imbue or the good that they transmit to others. It's part of I think Taylor Swift.
Something, Raul? They will just be a reflection of the value because they are an aggregation of the society that they represent, right? So they're actually reflecting back on the values that exist in that society. So we already know that in that society, transparency of information is important. The truth of information is important because if you lie, you're struck out of the game, right? So those things will get reflected in those icons, but there'll be bad things that will get reflected too. So we'll just have to see how that works out.
Yeah, it strikes me that another one that we'll need to be contended with will be arrogance. The I don't know if there's a word for it. You would know better than I. The desire to exploit others at one, it's sort of that narcissism that you talk about, that, if I'm only in it for me, again, and that's where I think theater in particular is replete with examples of plays that show the consequences of narcissism. And, either you get it and say, oh, I don't want to be like that. Or you go, oh, yeah, well, he was just stupid. He should have done this, and then he would have been successful. I don't know how you get people to choose the better of those two,
Raul, something I've learned when I meet, and you and I should meet at some point, by the way, you have lunch or dinner together, is that I've met a number of podcasters, and the thing that really struck me in my face was that how what they are on their podcast was totally different from what they are in person. And I'm sure that you are not the same in that way, because in a lot of cases when podcasters enjoy their profession a lot, they are so engrossed in getting those likes that they become a persona just to get those likes, whatever it is that they are in reality. Mm-hmm. And then when you meet them in reality, it's like, oh, they're actually, not at all what they, the way they project themselves.
Yeah.
So the projection itself becomes an art in itself, right? Now, the thing is that, and that's why in the networked world, there is this concept called the avatar, which is that you can be something else in reality, but whatever you do as you interact with others on the digital platform, you have an avatar of what you want to be. And that's why I said earlier that we can have multiple identities in a digital network, and it's perfectly valid. And I see the growing of that when I meet with influencers, because we all become influencers in the network world, because we all have to build our own community, and so therefore we're always projecting ourselves to the people we like. So I think that this idea of identity and projection of identity, that's a game that we need to ace. And what you were saying just now about influencers who have got a positive impact. Not only are they a reflection of the society that created them, but also they don't even need to be what they really are in person. So that's why David Braunfeld, who wrote that paper in 1990, said that the crime in the network world is deception. It's not theft; it's deception. Yeah. And it's both a crime as well as a survival tool, I guess.
Yeah, I have seen over the course of my lifetime, especially from my wife. Honestly, I talk her up quite a bit. I cannot deceive my wife she just knows when I'm, and I buckle immediately because I know she's just going to see through it. So I have learned, my friend, that there is no value in deception. There is absolutely, because you will get caught in my life. So I am what you see. Anyone that sees this podcast and knows me in real life says, yeah, that's raw. That's raw.
You're the pre-trained in the GPT.
Yeah. Perhaps. Well, my problem is my ego, my theater, self wants the applause, right? Of, what a good job. I have to, perhaps we can wrap up and then, plan our next time together. Because it's so fun to talk with you, Emmanuel.
You ask the most interesting questions, and then you may not realize it, but you then go into a sentence that teaches me something, right? And I say, oh yes, that's I'll put my finger on that, and the lying thing was a very good one, and so I'm enjoying this conversation, and it's something that's going to sit at the back of my head, and I'm going to come back to it and say, yeah, you're right.
We'll talk to your dad if he's still alive. So
yeah. We are in this conversation. We've asked a lot of questions. We need to have a conversation later, maybe a year or 2 years later, reflecting on the questions that we've just asked, and then saying how it's evolved. I would like to do that with you.
You mentioned in our first interview that I asked a question that you wanted to touch on, and I went back and listened to that interview, and I just didn't catch the right point. But do you remember what that question was that I raised? And he was like, "That's a very interesting point. We need to talk to that in the next." Do you remember?
Now I don't.
Okay, well,
it'll come to me, but
we'll go back. I'll go back and we'll figure it out. But my last point, though, was, and it speaks somewhat to the nature of human beings. You talk about the Gutenberg press and how it was developed in 1540. And then it took, it took 15 years for the Gutenberg Bible to be printed. And, common history teaches that we made the Gutenberg press so that we could print the Bible. And that's absolutely fallacious. In fact, the first things that were printed, the widespread use of it had to do with religious propaganda and, incendiary religious pamphlets and pornography, which not only is it the oldest profession in the world to be a prostitute, it is the oldest printed material in the history of people as pornography. I suspect it would have even been on clay tablets had it been possible to, actually, although Egyptian hieroglyphics arguably has some pornography in it.
Who's to say, right?
Yeah, those things disintegrated. They were so widely disseminated that they got destroyed, just like old Playboy magazines,
Right.
So do you think that's indicative of what's going to happen with this personalization?
Yes. So the thing about how the printing press and the popular ideas were the first to be propagated very quickly because the early printing press they needed to recoup their investment. And also, by the way, the reason Bibles were not the first is because people still like to have their hand-drawn Bibles at that time, and they wanted printing press that they were still doing screen printing to replicate beautifully calligraphed Bibles in that time. And then it was much later that it got the Bible itself became printed. Now the thing is that what it tells us is that, and this I sort of came to me as a realization when I was traveling in the Caribbean. The fact that the Caribbean even exists was because it was driven by a number of fiction as to that was the way to India and to China. There was a reason to preach the gospel to the natives. There was gold in South America. The propagation of ideas or new realities always starts on the basis of fiction, factors that eventually we come to realize as being an excuse for getting there. In the same way that the reason for going to Mars is because a comet might hit the Earth one day and we need an alternative planet. And the probability of that is neither here nor there. It's the real reason is because we can afford it today, right? And it's just that people like Elon Musk has to create an excuse for funding that whole process. So even as we enter the age of artificial intelligence, the first beneficiaries of artificial intelligence will be the perfunctory, the things that we would consider to be non-economically essential, but for which people do provide value. One of it is gaming. You think that gaming is just an activity of recreation, but it's actually an economic activity in its own right. And then it creates the power of the network effect from where real economic activity eventually takes place. But if there was no gaming, there will be no network effect. If there's no gaming, there would be no investment in the virtual reality glasses, that Apple has, just created. And then if there's no fiction, there would be no desire to be able to, create a lifestyle that interacts with multiverses, which is, a reality and a metaverse reality coexisting with each other. Everything, everywhere, all at once. So I think it's a fiction that takes us to the next level, and then we create the reality. And so what we're seeing in artificial intelligence right now is that a lot of fiction, a lot of nonsense being created, but that's what needs to happen before the knowledge and the value is formalized, and then we start seeing. So one writer pointed out that it was 150 years after the Gutenberg Press before the first scientific journal was published.
Yeah.
So we need that whole process of the entertainment, perfunctory, shaping the industry before we see the value. And 150 years is a long time, and then you think that that in fact the Gutenberg Press was a weapon because the church couldn't proliferate ideas as fast as Martin Luther, who was 50 years after the Gutenberg Press.
Well, and the King James Bible was the same thing. It disseminated the reality of the word versus the transmutation of the word and what it had become through manipulation and deception. So I would think that given the speed at which knowledge is progressing, that we're probably not looking at 150 years, maybe 15. So who knows? That'll be my prophecy.
That's the fear, actually, and that's the effect it has. What you just said has on me is that I'm saying to myself that, my goodness, I spent 50 years learning everything I did, and then it's irrelevant, and then it'll be irrelevant again. More irrelevant in another 15 years. Yeah. That's a certain sadness in there that we didn't. We didn't grow up and grow old and grow wise to something that we could handle, but only to hand over to something that it will not be ours to learn. It will be the next generation. Yeah. That's a certain sadness in me for that one. On that one.
Well, it's a big problem in my mind that, even things like atomic energy and, nuclear bombs, that we developed that capacity way beyond our ability, our wisdom to understand what that capacity was going to mean. And in fact, I want to see Oppenheimer, the movie, because I think they explore that.
I watched
topic.
it.
Did you?
I absolutely was grateful for that movie. It was a journey in geopolitics. It's a journey in history. It's a journey in values. In fact, there were phrases in that. And it's a well-scripted movie. And there were points in the movie, because I knew the historical facts, that I was just waiting for someone to say it, and then he did. So, there's a point where they decided to bomb Hiroshima instead of Kyoto. And that was because the foreign secretary at the time had said that, let's preserve this historic city. And I'd visited it before. And he said it in the movie. And I said, I could almost have, preempted the script at several points. Yeah. So it's a very well, and the script runs so well. I totally enjoyed it.
I'm looking forward to it for the same reason. I have enough understanding of the historical perspective of what was all happening there. Even I saw the scene that I had read about where they had a pool going as to whether or not the bomb was going to ignite the atmosphere or not. And when I read that the first time, I thought, oh my God, there was actually a supposition that could happen, and we still blew it off. I mean, it's just, oh my Lord, that tells you reams about the human race, that such gifted intellectual minds would still say, yeah, okay, let's try.
But it also that was so funny, because I was going 20% of atmosphere is oxygen, right? So right. And the thing is that what they were able to prove mathematically, they had no idea how it's going to show up physically. Yeah. And it actually reflects the entrepreneurship at that time, the sense of personal ownership of a decision or an idea, and the fact that the various people had the opportunity to do that. Today, if you try to do, create an atomic bomb in the EU, at least, maybe not in the US very much, in the EU, the number of regulatory hurdles that you need to get through to get it approved, it will never be approved. It will never get off the ground. Yeah. So you do need a kind of a cavalier, let's just make it up as we go kind of thing.
Well, and that was that was the necessity of war, right? I'm sorry.
Yeah, which I hope will continue to be a hallmark of the U.S. actually, because when I think about all the different major economies and how they've evolved, the role of government has become front and center, and I call it the age of the competent government. When Ronald Reagan said the government is the problem, government was at that time incompetent. Today, the U.S., the EU, the China, India, these are highly competent governments, and then they become the creator of new realities, which you don't want them to have that role, but they seem to be the most capable of. And the only thing that the U.S. has, which the other economies don't have, is a countervailing force, which is the power of the free enterprise. So they are actually equally as powerful as each other. And that's why there's a tension, and that's why there's Elon Musk throwing barbs at the president and so on. You can only do that in the U.S. You can't do it in almost any other country.
Yeah, you'd be arrested very quickly and never heard from again. You won't be influencing anyone then, unless you're Nelson Mandela, I suppose. Then things do turn around. But anyways, Emmanuel, I do look forward to our next conversation, and I hope it's not a year away. I hope we can find other things to talk about in between now and then, just because it's so enjoyable. But Emmanuel Daniel has been my guest again this week. He is the author of a book called The Great Transition, subtitled The Personalization of Finances Here. Go back and listen. I know I will be going back and listening to our conversation because it's so, I think, rich with things to think about. And I'm big on thinking about things because I find that is not happening as often as it needs to in our contemporary society.
The conversation we had were preliminary conversations on the transformational things happening today. We actually ended up asking more questions than we answered in this conversation. So it's given me reason to go back and think a little bit more. And yes, I'm looking forward to our next conversation.
And I will look forward to meeting you in person too. And then you can tell me whether or not I am the same person in real life as I am in the podcast. And you can attest to it then in your community. That would be wonderful if you could say, oh yeah, that's him. He's not. So anyways, thank you, Emmanuel. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. Take care, folks. Tune in next week. Hopefully we'll have somebody as interesting as Emmanuel, but that's going to be hard. So take care.
Take care.